Welcome to Tech Topics brought to you by CyberVenture. We help keep small businesses stay protected and compliant with cutting-edge cybersecurity and IT solutions.
Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Andy. I'm the managing consultant for CyberVenture. Today I wanted to do a video that goes over some commonly misused terms. I'm kind of help define them because it makes it a lot easier to have a thing if you are calling it the right thing. So there are four big terms I hear all the time in my line of work: backups, disaster recovery, business continuity, and incident response. These are all things you want to do before you need them, because after the fact, it's not very helpful. But they're very different things, even though they're often related, even though there's a lot of overlap. They do different jobs, and there's some very important distinctions to talk about. So if you're looking to hire somebody to help you do these things, make sure you know what it is you're asking for. Backup. I'll start with that. Backup is the oldest, most basic common thing that you can have. Backup is just simply copying your data and putting it on something else that's not the system that's protecting, so that if you have a hard drive failure or the building burns down or it gets corrupted or whatever, you can take that data and then you can rebuild your environment and then restore the data and get back up and running. Backup generally doesn't really address things like how long it takes to get back online. It doesn't address costs. It's very simple. And it doesn't even talk about how to build the system again. Let's say you've got an SQL database. You've got some kind of application. Backup would make sure that the data is getting out of the database cleanly and correctly, stored on a medium of some kind, and then available to restore later. But during that restore process, you're going to have to rebuild a server. You're going to have to install SQL, maybe build another server, reinstall the original application, and then import the data. I think it'd be very time consuming, and you have to have your labor available. If the original people who built it aren't around or the documentation isn't very good, you get a lot of trouble restoring the system back the way it was. So you can see the challenges with that. Now, there's also off-site backup, and that really gets confused with disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is the next thing. We'll get that in 1 second. If the building burns down and your backups are in that building, you're kind of hosed, aren't you? Literally and metaphorically. You got to make sure that data is elsewhere, whether it be the cloud, whether it be on a tape that gets sent on a truck to like Iron Mountain or somebody, or any way you can get out of the building, get out of the building. That is called off-site backup. It is often confused with disaster recovery because it is a method of addressing a disaster recovery concern, but it's still really just backup. Let's say you got a cloud system and you just back up the data to the cloud. I mean, like we sell Acronis here. We use that. If you just back up to cloud, and that's the end of your plan is to back it up and get it in the cloud, that's not disaster recovery. So disaster recovery goes further than backup. Not just do we have our data somewhere else, but what would it actually take to get our computers and our network systems back up running the way it was? Like I said before, it's more the labor of building your application server and building your SQL server and getting all hooked back up the way it was than restoring the data. That's the harder part, right? Disaster recovery will typically do things like, it can be a manual process if you go through it thoroughly, but typically what they'll do is they'll back up what's called an image or an exact copy of the entire hard drive in some kind of executable, runnable system. Like most companies today have their machines as virtual machines running on physical hardware. You might have a single server and a bunch of guests running on it, and if you can copy the entire guest as a whole, you can restore it to another virtual host of similar design, say Hyper-V to Hyper-V or VMware to VMware, pretty easily. It's fairly straightforward, and when you do that, you end up with a situation, an environment that is almost identical to what you had before the event, whatever it is, happened. And that allows you to bring your systems back online to recover from a disaster. Disaster recovery also covers any disaster you could think of. Maybe it's a fire, maybe it's vandalism or theft. Here's where it gets confusing with another thing I'm going to talk about later, incident response. Sometimes the disaster is a cybersecurity breach, and then you get to this delving of terms. Incident response, we're going to talk about in a minute. Incident response is a term generally reserved for security context. So if you're talking about preparing your company to recover from a breach, you're probably writing an incident response plan, that kind of thing. Even though the disaster you have might be a security generated disaster. Maybe your environment didn't burn down or wasn't hit with a tornado or whatever. Maybe it's a cybersecurity thing that caused you to crash. Are you prepared for that? So I have a number of people that I've talked to that like to combine their disaster recovery and incident response plan together. I think that's a good way of doing things. It's one way anyway, not necessarily the best or the worst. It's kind of a judgment call there, right? But you could see, I hope, the different thinking, the different emphasis that would go into the different types of plans. And you should probably detail different sections of whatever plan you come up with if you're going to combine them. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is business continuity. Business continuity is bigger than just disaster recovery. Disaster recovery and incident response plans are all about getting your IT system back up and running. Business continuity is about continuing to do business despite whatever setback you run into. It might be a loss of your building. It might be a cybersecurity breach. It might be you lose power in your neighborhood. Maybe the internet's out, or maybe you're for whatever. Maybe it's a general strike that takes your production out of line. Who the heck knows? So it's more business continuity plan is more concerned with what does the business actually need to do to be a going concern. Let's say you manufacture screws, and one type of screw for one kind of customer is 85% of your business. And management sits down and thinks about, well, what would happen if our plant went down? What would we need to continue to stay in business? Well, that screw that's 85% of your business, you need the machines necessary to make those screws. You need trucks, you need warehousing space, and maybe you determine that you can partner with one of your competitors and vice versa. Sometimes your competitors can also be you can also cooperate with the competition sometimes. And maybe you be disaster recovery for each other. You do the same thing, but each have your own client base, and you have some kind of non-disclosure agreement between each other, some non-compete agreement whereby you will manufacture these screws for your competition, and and they will manufacture for you in the event of a disaster. And here's the amount of money we pay each other, or something. I mean, I'm making stuff up. Maybe you don't use your competition. Maybe you use a totally unrelated company. Maybe a custom job shop that makes almost anything, but they're really more expensive than the way you normally make. Costs are lower, and then you simply say, okay, it would take us a year to rebuild our production facility. That would raise our production costs by, I don't know, 30%, which means our margin drops by 30% for a period of year. Therefore, we need this amount of money to act as a buffer until we can recover production. And then you build your disaster recovery plan by buying enough insurance to cover that 30% increase in costs. That's a business continuity plan. You really start thinking about what the business does. And as a business continuity plan, you would decide, okay, well, the other screws we make, you know what? If we just stop selling those and let other companies have it, that's old legacy business we want to get out of anyway. No problem. We'll take the hit on the amount of sales, and we'll focus on our core product if a disaster like this happens, and we deem that to be acceptable risk. Because, I mean, a disaster might not happen, right? How much do you want to spend to prevent something that isn't going to happen? It's kind of like buying insurance. How much insurance do you want to buy? Well, you want to pay for zero. But that's too risky for certain things. And you don't want to pay what it's going to cost to mitigate every risk. Some risks you're just willing to accept. That's a business decision. That's business continuity. How does the business continue to operate? And it thinks about things like, where am I going to get staffing? What about financing during the disaster, alternate facilities, not just for IT to run out of, but for employees to show up and do work. What's our communication plan to our customers? What about our suppliers? Have we designed our supply chain contracts? Say we guarantee we can produce 100,000 pounds of these screws for X, Y, and Z customer a month at a minimum, up to $250,000 per month, blah, blah, blah. And in the event of a declared disaster, that minimum commitment drops to this. And then your vendor goes, okay, fine, we'll accept that in the event of an official disaster. And maybe you could the two of you would hammer out, what a disaster is by definition, that sort of thing. But that kind of planning is what it takes to make something not just a disaster recovery plan, but a business continuity plan. Hopefully that kind of gives you the differences. Business continuity is the whole business. Disaster recovery is really just very IT focused. Now, a business a disaster recovery plan will still ask important questions like what's important to the business. Maybe your line of business app matters a lot and you can't function without that particular application. Okay, well, that means we need a domain controller for authentication, we need our SQL server, and we need a line of business app. But maybe we don't need a redundant host. Maybe we only need one host to make that work. Okay, fine, we need this much hardware then. And maybe we don't care about some ticket program for troubleshoot tickets. We'll just start all over again. We'll go through our emails or whatever. Certain systems we can live without, some we can't. Certain ones we can live without for longer than others. You design that and make those kind of decisions in disaster recovery plan. Another one I've seen is your recovery point objective and recovery time objective. That would give you an idea of how old the data can be if you restore it. Like maybe you can afford to go back an entire month and be fine. That'll be enough to keep it going. Or maybe you can only a week, or maybe only a day. I would say a day-old data is a really typical goal for most organizations. But if you're a bank and you're doing lots of transactions and there's big money in every transaction, your recovery time objective might be minutes or seconds. But then your recovery point objective, your recovery time objective would be how long can you afford to get that data back. Maybe you need up to the second information, but you can afford to be without it for a day. That would give you a recovery point of 1 second and a recovery time of 1 day. Hopefully that makes sense. That's another attribute that you would use to define in your business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, that you would probably also define in your business continuity plan. So they'd be in both, but the business continuity would be focused on more things than just the IT. Like it would probably go into why is the system critical. I mean, maybe if maybe a disaster recovery plan will be able to bring back a particular system that just won't matter at a certain level of disaster. And the business continuity might say, hey, in our disaster recovery plan, we plan on restoring these systems, but if we reach this level of defined disaster, we're going to cancel that because it's of no value to the business because the warehouse is gone. We can't manufacture the thing this application helps us to do anyway. Hopefully I get some idea. Incident response. A lot of that comes down to your duty of communication. Who do you have to notify when you have a incident happen? Customers, probably anybody whose data you are a custodian of that's affected, things like that. Perhaps law enforcement, maybe supply chain partners. If you are under some kind of compliance to say like NIST 800-171, you would have to immediately notify the Department of Defense, and there's a whole procedure for that, with the registering with SPURS and all that ahead of time. But that should be your incident response plan. Again, that kind of detail will be there. That might not be in your disaster recovery plan. Disaster recovery plan might only notify certain people, and whereas your incident response would notify more people because it's affecting their data, not just your organization. I mean, if your business got shut down because a rider's broken and trashed your production, maybe you don't want to notify the general public of that. It could be a black eye kind of thing. Let's say you've got a union dispute going on or something. I don't know. The scenario doesn't matter, but you may not be on the same obligation to notify the public in the case of an inability to manufacture. So availability. You got confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's the triad of security. Availability, maybe you can't do the thing, but maybe if that's the only thing that's affected and your confidentiality and integrity are both fine, you may not need to notify anybody outside your organization or a limited number. It looks better for your company reputation. Data, that's integrity problem. That's availability. That's integrity. That's confidentiality. If you get a confidentiality breach, you've got to notify those stakeholders in that data. That's probably legal obligation in most cases, and certainly a partnership agreement kind of obligation. So that's to give you the idea of the difference. So just to recap, backup is just backup of data, and with no concern to what it takes to actually bring a system back to be able to use that data. That just means that you can recover. No explanation about how you're going to recover, how expensive it is. Disaster recovery answers those questions and a little more about, well, what's important, what's priority, how are we going to recover the actual system to be able to go ahead and use it, and which systems do we care about versus ones we don't. Incident response is kind of that, but in a security context, hey, we're down not because of a failed hard drive or because someone misconfigured something, but because we were breached, we were hacked. Now what? And that's going to follow that kind of thinking. And then finally, business continuity is, okay, stuff happened. How does it affect the actual business? What's going to happen to our quarterly business, our sales, quarterly sales goals? Can we meet those? What are they now? What changes based on declared disaster? So I hope that gives you a good idea of the difference between those four terms. They are probably the most abused bits of terminology that I see in my customers. When I talk to people, everybody gets those terms wrong or uses them inappropriately or doesn't quite fully grasp them. I hope that this kind of sets the record straight and helps you with your business planning. And if you enjoyed this content, of course, the usual like, subscribe, and all that stuff would be greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching. We hope this video has provided valuable information to you. Be sure to share this video with other small business owners to spread the word about the importance of cybersecurity. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. If you want more information about cybersecurity, visit us at www.cyberventure.com.